Okay, so these notes are going to be 5.11 ecological footprint, and let's go ahead and get started. Ecological footprints are the measure of how much a person or group consumes, and it's expressed in an area of land. So, some of the factors that this land is required for is food production. We require land to make our food, to grow our food, even to, feed our food sources. We also require land to produce our raw materials. So the raw materials include woods, metals, plastics, those sorts of things. Even fossil fuels are considered, and all those energy sources are considered raw materials. We need land for housing. We need land to produce electricity, like I was talking about. So we need coal and natural gas and solar energy and wind turbines to produce our electricity. And we also even need land to dispose of our waste. So that would be in terms of landfill space. And so, what exactly then, or how do we measure an ecological footprint? And what's the difference? Because sometimes you might hear it referred to as an ecological footprint, and sometimes you'll hear it referred to as a carbon footprint. So, what's the difference? Okay, so an ecological footprint is measured in land, and land, when we think of land, we're thinking of a hectare. Globally, we use the term hectare. Here in the US, or if we're talking about a biologically productive hectare, in the US, we use the measurement for land in acres, and so that would be approximately 2.47 acres. You can think of it as like a football field. A football field is about 1 1/3 acres, and so it's almost like two football fields is a hectare. Okay, so measured in land, it is this biologically productive hectare, which is approximately two football fields, just to kind of put it in perspective for you. And so that's how we measure an ecological footprint. A carbon footprint is measured in the tons of CO2 that we produce per year. So, how much CO2 are we using per year? And that's measured in tons. Okay. So, all CO2 that's what goes into like this carbon footprint is all the CO2 that's released from your consumption, like how much are you consuming, and then how much CO2 does it take to produce, that consumption level, and then what activities are you participating in that increase the amount of CO2 that you use. So everything that goes into a carbon footprint would include like the material goods, food production, and then energy use. Okay, so it's a little bit different. An ecological footprint even kind of takes into account like your housing requirements and things like that, whereas carbon footprint really is focused more on your direct energy use and then your indirect energy use as well. Okay, so factors that affect your footprint. So, how can you either increase your footprint, which is not necessarily good for the environment? And then what are some ways that you can decrease your footprint, which would mean that you're trying to be more sustainable, more environmentally conscious. So, unfortunately, affluent countries or and wealth just really drives up your ecological footprint. As people increase or improve their wealth, they tend to live in larger homes. They tend to drive more expensive cars, larger cars. Usually, more expensive and larger cars require premium gas, which means it even requires more fossil fuels to run the car. So there's plus you tend to travel more if you acquire more wealth. You also need more resources. Okay, so there's just a lot. You tend to have larger families, and so all of this goes into increasing your footprint. Also, increasing your footprint occurs if you eat meat. So, meat requires more land to grow the meat, it requires more water. to sustain the life of the meat, and it requires more energy consumption just overall in the meat production and transport of the meat. And then also, if you use fossil fuels, then you are increasing your footprint. And here in the US, we rely on fossil fuels for things like heating our homes, electricity, travel, producing plastic. We're a very plastic reliant society. So, all of these things tend to increase our ecological and carbon footprints. We can decrease our footprints by using more renewable energy sources like wind, solar, and hydroelectric sources. We can decrease it by relying more on public transportation, which is one reason I'm really glad that the city of Indianapolis is really trying to expand its public transportation by adding more busing. That just requires less gas. You can also, besides just using public transportation, you can try to carpool places. I know Mr. Rogelski and I started driving to school together because it cuts down on us having driving two cars everywhere. You can also switch to a plant-based diet. That's very hard to do and to get enough protein, although it is very possible. You just have to be diligent about eating enough protein sources, but switching to a plant-based diet. And then you can consume less, you can travel less, you can use less energy. Just doing some simple things like turning off the lights in your home and unplugging devices when they're not in use. All of those things help to decrease your footprint. So, if the whole world lived like us, that's how we tend to express ecological footprints. So if in the United States, unfortunately, if the entire world consumed the same level of resources as the average person in the United States, then it would actually take around 5.1 Earth's worth of resources would be needed to sustain that level of consumption. So, thankfully, the entire world does not consume resources the same way that the US consumes resources. And I am guilty of this as well. So, again, the average US footprint is 5.1 Earths. There might be people, I know I had someone in my class last year who traveled all the time, drove a big car, had a really big house. Their family, if everyone lived like them, we would need 12 Earths. When I calculated my footprint last year, was at like 3 point something Earths. However, that's when I was eating a plant-based diet. This year, I was not getting enough protein, and I switched back to a meat-based diet. So my footprint's probably even higher now. So, there's lots of things that go into this calculation. And I think the bottom line is we just try to conserve things as much as we can. And we do just little things that we can do. And then, try to focus on, as a nation, what are some things that we can do? Because it really is going to take the entire nation and our governments to get together to figure out how to solve this issue. So there are small things that we can do, and that will definitely make a difference, but there's large things that need to happen at a much larger level. And so let's take a look at this really quickly. Present day, here is our footprint of the global human population. You can see the small footprint on the Earth. And here you can see this is our average global human consumption. If the entire if we look at the average person on the planet, it would take about 1.85 Earths. So what that means is that humanity consumes 1.85 times what the Earth can produce in a year. That's because we're using our fossil fuel reserves. Those are eventually going to run out. And so that's why the technology is trying to really come up with a way to realistically use sustainable energy sources so that and companies are, a lot of research is going into this right now. Governments are investing in sustainable energy resources because this is going to run out someday. But anyway, I think this graphic is nice because it compares the current global footprint to how many Earths are required by the average American. And so you can just see we're a more affluent country. Of course, we're going to use more resources. Okay, and so let's move on to our practice FRQ. Describe one factor that accounts for the difference in the carbon footprint, and this is demonstrated on this chart on the for the carbon footprint between the United States and Uganda. Explain one environmental consequence of this factor. Okay, and that's it for this time. Next time, we're going to be talking about 5.12 sustainability. I'll see you all next time.